Usually when we think of luxury, there is this expectation of pristine beauty. You look at a high-end diamond, and the origin story we imagine is just pure, crystal clear perfection pulled straight from the earth.
Right, like clean, sanitized, completely untouched by anything gross.
Yeah, exactly.
Bet.
But the most expensive, luxurious perfumes in history didn't start in a pristine field of lavender. I mean, they started with literal whale vomit and the anal glands of civet cats.
It is quite the reality check when you actually look into it.
It really is. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going on this fascinating journey through the history, the chemistry, and the future of fragrance. We're tracking how the perfume industry evolved from relying on literal animal excretions to utilizing cutting-edge 2026 biotech labs to create, well, entirely new scent profiles.
Yeah, we are unpacking a massive shift today, moving from those visceral, really shocking ingredients that basically built the foundation of the industry all the way to lab-grown molecules.
And we've got a massive stack of sources today. We are looking at historical perfume archives, some intense regulatory deep dives, the complex chemistry of floral notes, and of course the latest 2026 trend reports from both the fashion and biotech industries.
We have a lot of ground to cover.
We do. So let's unpack the sheer shock value of this first, because early perfume wasn't just, a body spray you casually spritzed on before leaving the house. It was practically a wearable pharmacy.
Oh, absolutely.
By the Renaissance, you had these Glover perfumers using these heavy animal scents to project high social status, but also to act as aphrodisiacs and literally fight off disease. But my biggest question, looking at this historical source materials, is how on earth did early humans figure out that beaver cloacas or whale intestinal concretions could make them smell good?
Well, it wasn't really about smelling pretty at first, It
Yeah.
was about sheer utility, because early tanners and hunters were dealing with animal hides all day. And hides, as you can imagine, smell like death and decay.
Right, literally rotting meat.
Exactly. So they noticed that certain glandular secretions for the animals they were already processing were incredibly pungent. These waxy, oily substances were strong enough to completely obliterate the smell of the rotting leather.
So they were just working with what was literally right in front of them in the dirt.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the North American beaver uses a secretion called castoreum to waterproof its fur.
Which comes from its cloaca, right?
Right. And then you have the civet, which is this small animal somewhere between a cat and a fox. It uses a highly odorous perianal gland to mark its territory.
Oh, wow.
And the Asian musk deer has a preputial sac right under its abdomen that swells up during rutting season to attract mates. So we aren't talking about delicate, rare flowers here. We're talking about the reproductive and digestive tracts of wild animals. It is pure biological signaling.
And when early humans started applying those waxy substances to leather gloves and eventually just to their own skin, they discovered this secondary, almost magical property.
The fixative quality, yeah.
Yeah, right. Our sources mention these animal fluids are phenomenal fixatives, which basically means they act like an anchor.
Exactly, because a light floral note, like say rose or jasmine, it evaporates very quickly off the heat of human skin.
It just disappears.
Right. But if you mix it with a heavy animal secretion, that dense, waxy material physically grips the lighter molecules and just holds them down. It alters the evaporation rate entirely.
Making a delicate floral scent last for hours or even days on the wearer, which is wild.
It really is. And from there, it naturally transitions from basic utility to extreme luxury.
Because it was so hard to get.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, pre-industrial elites used these heavy, pungent scents as cultural capital. Ancient Egyptians and Cleopatra used civet for its perceived healing powers. Marco Polo actually encountered musk, which, by the way, comes from the Sanskrit word muska, meaning testicle.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, and Marco Polo called it the finest balsam. And think about ambergris. To get ambergris, you literally have to wait for a sperm whale to expel a mass of undigested squid beaks.
Just casually wait for whale vomit.
Right, and then you have to hope that grayish rock floats on the ocean currents long enough to cure in the sun and the salt water before it finally washes up on some random beach.
So wearing these scents basically signaled that you had the power, the money, and the resources to literally conquer nature. It was a giant neon sign of wealth.
Oh, the ultimate flex of wealth. Think about the logistics of hunting down an Asian musk deer in the mountains of Tibet just so you could smell powerful at a royal court in Europe.
But obviously you can't sustain a global modern industry on 1 to 5% of sperm whales randomly expelling ambergris, or by constantly hunting endangered deer.
No, the math simply didn't work once fragrance became a mass-market product.
Right, and the source material shows this massive ethical and supply crisis hitting the industry. Because, ambergris is incredibly rare. When
Right.
it's actually found on a beach, it can cost up to 10,000 euros per kilo.
Which is astronomical.
Yeah.
And harvesting natural musk literally required killing the musk deer.
And the civet cats.
That was awful, too. To extract civet traditionally, farmers had to perform a curettage, essentially scraping out the gland of the live animal with a specialized tool repeatedly. It was entirely unethical and unsustainable.
Which eventually triggered massive regulatory crackdowns. Our deep dive into the regulatory sources shows that CITES, which is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, they stepped in to protect the musk deer.
Yeah, and civet farms were widely banned.
And then the International Fragrance Association, or IFRA, they stepped in and banned animal ingredients entirely in the 1980s. And the sources point out IFRA still actively restricts ingredients today. Even natural plant-based ones like oak moss or popular synthetic floral molecules like liliol, usually for being potential allergens.
And that regulatory pressure forced the entire industry into this constant, highly secretive state of reformulation.
Right, the reformulation puzzle.
Yes. Perfumers have to constantly tweak these classic, iconic formulas to comply with new bans, and it is a grueling puzzle.
Because, as the sources explain, you can't just swap one ingredient for another. It's not like using almond milk instead of cow's milk in your coffee.
Not at all. It all comes back to those evaporation rates we talked about. If IFRA bans a natural musk and you try to replace it with a synthetic one, that synthetic molecule might evaporate at a completely different speed.
And without that specific anchor, your top notes just fly away. So a perfume that used to smell like a perfectly balanced bouquet suddenly smells like sour alcohol after 20 minutes.
Or maybe a wood note disappears entirely, and you're left with only a heavy, cloying sweetness in the base. The entire matrix of the perfume just collapses.
So what does this all mean for our olfactory heritage? If these formulas are constantly being tweaked in secret because of regulations, are we even wearing the same classic perfumes our grandparents wore?
Honestly, no. The famous 1920s perfumes you buy at a department store today have to be fundamentally different from the originals. They are modern reconstructions.
Wow. Which really highlights this stark irony in the modern natural is better movement. In perfumery, natural had actually become deeply unethical and unsustainable.
Exactly. Synthetic chemistry was actually the hero here. It saved our favorite fragrances, and it saved the animals.
Right. Science stepped in to duplicate what nature provided, but without the inherent cruelty.
Yes, but there was a catch.
There's always a catch, because human noses still craved that primal animalic depth, didn't they?
We did. We didn't want completely sanitized flat flowers. We wanted the illusion of the animal.
And our sources on the complex chemistry of floral notes show that perfumers achieved this by chemically bridging the gap between floral and, well, fecal, which introduces a really fascinating chemical compound called indoles.
Indoles are such captivating molecules. They are found naturally in lush white florals, so things like jasmine, gardenia, orange blossom, honeysuckle.
And crucially, they are also found naturally in horse sweat, decomposing flesh, and human feces.
Yet nature is funny like that.
Right.
In its pure, isolated form, indole looks like fine white diamond dust. But if you smell it pure, it is overwhelmingly pungent.
The sources quote perfumers saying that working with pure indole makes their whole lab smell like suffocating tar-like mothballs for days.
Oh, it's incredibly harsh. But, and here's where the magic happens, when you highly dilute it, that mothball smell just completely vanishes.
It gives way to this radiant, nectar-suffused floral quality. The texts describe it as giving the perfume a prickly or a raw silk textural sensation.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. It's perfectly like pointillism in art. If you press your nose right up to a pointillist painting, it's just a harsh, ugly, distinct dot, the mothball.
Yeah.
But step back, let it dilute into the bigger picture, and suddenly it's a blooming, photorealistic jasmine.
That visual analogy captures the mechanism perfectly. You absolutely need the harsh dot to create the full, beautiful image.
But why? Why are our human brains wired to find a chemical that is literally associated with decay and feces so intoxicatingly beautiful when it's hidden inside a flower?
It just highlights the sheer complexity of human olfaction. To the human brain, absolute perfection in scent is actually really boring.
Interesting.
If you create a perfectly clean, sanitized floral accord in a lab, just the sweet, pretty notes without any indoles, it ends up smelling like cheap artificial flavoring or like bathroom cleaner.
Right. It smells fake.
Exactly. It lacks life.
Yeah.
To feel alive, to feel natural, a scent requires a touch of funk or rot. It's the cycle of life and death encapsulated in a single smell. That slight edge of decay is what our brains recognize as the signature of a real, living, breathing flower.
Wow. So beauty actually requires a little bit of darkness to feel authentic.
Precisely.
So basic chemistry gave us the power to harness indoles, and it gave us early synthetic musks. But relying on heavy petrochemicals to create those synthetics just ended up trading an animal rights crisis for an environmental one.
Unfortunately, yes. The evolution of synthetic musks has been a very rocky journey.
Because the first ones were actually toxic, right?
Yeah, the first synthetics discovered in the late 19th century were nitro musks, which were eventually banned for toxicity. Then, in the 1950s, the industry moved to polycyclic musks.
And what was the issue there?
Well, they smelled incredibly clean, but chemically they were too stable. They didn't biodegrade, so they just built up in waterways in the environment over decades.
Which brings us to today's safer alternatives. Things like macrocyclic and allocyclic musks. Without getting too bogged down in the chemistry, macrocyclics basically have larger ring structures in their molecules, which makes them fully biodegradable while still giving off that beautiful, clean linen or cotton vibe.
Right, they solve the environmental buildup problem.
But the real game changer in our 2026 sources, the thing that really blew my mind, is the biotech shift. Because instead of extracting from plants or relying on petrochemical synthesis, fragrances are now literally being lab cultured.
This is where the modern mechanisms get truly revolutionary. Biotech companies aren't just mixing chemicals in a beaker anymore. They are using fermentation.
Like brewing beer.
Exactly like that. They are taking the actual DNA sequence of a botanical plant, say a specific rare Bulgarian rose, and inserting that genetic code into the DNA of yeast or other microbes.
Okay, wait. I want to make sure I'm really wrapping my head around this. They program the yeast with rose DNA. Then they put that yeast into a giant fermentation vat, feed it sugar, and as the yeast ferments, instead of producing alcohol like it would in a brewery, it literally sweats out authentic rose oil.
That is exactly how it works. It is quite literally brewing scent molecules. And the resulting oil is chemically identical to what you would extract from a real field of roses and grass.
That is unbelievable.
But the process is carbon neutral, it's low waste, and it completely prevents the overharvesting of natural botanicals. Perfumers can now create a photorealistic rose scent without growing, watering, or harvesting a single actual rose.
And our source from California, Fresh Scent, also details how they can use completely unexpected natural plant alternatives to synthesize animal notes now.
Yes, the enzymatic breakdowns.
Right. They use specific enzymatic breakdowns of leek extracts to mimic the oceanic warmth of ambergris. And they even use cauliflower juice to mimic the heavy power of musk.
It's brilliant chemistry.
So it's exactly like lab-grown diamonds. Chemically identical to the real thing, but without the environmental destruction or the ethical baggage.
Exactly. And from a purely creative standpoint, biotech allows perfumers to design entirely new scent molecules that do not even exist in nature. It expands the perfumer's palette infinitely.
Okay, but I have to challenge this a bit. Because fragrance has always been sold on the romance of the ingredients,
Yeah.
right? You know, fields of jasmine picked at dawn in the south of France. Doesn't knowing that your luxury $200 perfume was brewed by genetically modified microbes in a vat of cauliflower juice kind of ruin the romance of it?
I see why you'd ask that, but I would argue it actually elevates the romance for the modern era.
How so?
Think about what you are preserving. You are preserving fragile natural ecosystems. You are ensuring supply chain stability so that a severe drought in Egypt doesn't mean your favorite perfume goes out of stock forever. And honestly, what's more romantic than inventing a completely new color for an artist to paint with, all while leaving the earth completely untouched?
That is a really beautiful way to look at it.
Yeah.
So armed with this incredible new biotech palette and these sustainable clean musks, what are perfumers actually creating for the modern wearer in 2026? Because the trend reports we pulled are fascinating.
The landscape has changed completely.
Yeah, we are moving drastically away from those loud, room-filling, sticky sweet scents of the early 2020s. The ELE 2026 trend report highlights a major pivot towards intimacy and nuance. And first up on their list, savory gourmands.
Right. So the traditional gourmand was heavily reliant on vanilla, caramel, and spun sugar. It was basically olfactory dessert. But the savory gourmand moves toward things like steamed rice, espresso, and toasted brioche.
There's a perfume specifically mentioned in the sources called dirty rice that captures the nutty vegetal aroma of steamed rice. And the report argues the reason our brains love this is because savory notes trigger a completely different kind of comfort.
Yeah, it's a deeper comfort.
Right. Vanilla is an instant sugar rush, but steamed rice or toasted bread taps into deep foundational sustenance. It feels warm and grounding.
Which ties directly into the next major trend from the reports. Zen scents. These are fragrances that are heavy on moss, tea, and incense. And they are explicitly designed to regulate the nervous system.
Which makes so much sense when you look at the state of the world right now. These subtle Zen scents perfectly reflect our modern anxiety. I mean, we are overwhelmed by constant noise, glowing screens, and chaos. We don't want a perfume that shouts at everyone in the elevator anymore.
No, not at all.
We want a scent that acts like a grounding mechanism, or like a comforting hug.
The LL report also notes this rise in what they call left-of-field fruits, so tart, hyperrealistic fig, mango, and passion fruit. They are leaning heavily on green and sour notes rather than sweet, syrupy ones.
And then perhaps the most significant shift mentioned across all the sources. Quiet fragrances, minimalist skin scents, and cold aldehydes.
These are fascinating from a chemical standpoint.
For anyone unfamiliar, cold aldehydes are those soapy synthetic chemical compounds that give perfumes a sudden, frosty blast. They smell like a snuffed candle or like fresh linen hanging out in the freezing cold.
They're very sharp, very distinct.
And they don't project across a room. They sit very close to the skin. And the sources note that Gen Z in particular is heavily into scent stacking, literally layering multiple subtle skin scents to create a bespoke signature that's meant only for someone who is physically close to them.
And this brings up a really fascinating sociological angle from our Petite Histoire source, because fragrance is not neutral. It is cultural capital.
Right.
It's a highly coded way we signal who we are to the people around us.
Think about the people in your own office or your friend group. When someone walks in smelling like an overpowering $400 bottle of heavy, traditional oud, what does that instantly tell you about them? And then contrast that with the person who just smells faintly of fresh tea leaves and steamed rice.
Exactly. This raises an important question about how we use scent. If we go back to the Renaissance, smelling loud and heady signaled wealth because the ingredients were rare and expensive. You were projecting power and dominance.
But today, the signaling has completely flipped.
Yes. Smelling clean, subtle, or like a hyper-niche steamed rice signals environmental privilege. It implies you have a clean domestic infrastructure, a stable climate, and that you aren't doing heavy manual labor that requires masking odors.
It also signals emotional control and insider knowledge. The ultimate flex has transitioned from how expensive your perfume smells to how discernible and intentional it is.
Yeah, recognizing a specific type of synthetic biotech musk or appreciating a minimal skin scent shows you have the cultural literacy to understand the code.
As the source notes, taste basically becomes a social weapon. It's highly performative.
But once you understand the system, you can choose to participate consciously. You stop buying for external validation, and you start selecting scents for coherence with your actual identity. The most refined choice isn't the loudest bottle anymore. It's the one you would wear, even if literally no one else could decode it.
Wow. What an incredible journey today. I mean, we started with Royal Glover perfumers harvesting musk deer glands to mask the stench of death.
We did.
We decoded the bizarre mothball-scented illusion of jasmine indoles. And we traveled all the way to 2026, where microbial yeast vats are brewing carbon-neutral skin scents that signal emotional zen to our peers.
The evolution of the industry is just a perfect mirror for the evolution of our own society's values. We've moved from sheer dominance over nature to a desperate, highly technical need to synthesize and protect it.
Perfectly said. So, to you listening, the next time you spray your favorite fragrance, take a second. Just think about the centuries of weird history, the incredibly complex chemistry of decay and bloom, and the subtle social signaling contained in that single drop resting on your skin. There is an entire world inside that little bottle.
A world that is constantly changing based on exactly what we need from.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If biotech is advancing so incredibly fast that we can now synthesize absolutely any scent molecule perfectly without ever touching nature, how long until we can capture and wear the exact lab-grown scent of a specific childhood memory?
Oh, wow.
Like a rainy morning in a city that no longer exists, or even the natural comforting skin scent of a loved one who has passed away. Will perfume eventually stop being about smelling good and instead become a way to literally wear our memories? Something to think about. Until next time on The Deep Dive.